Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something, well, something as old as government itself. How do you give a person or an institution enough power to actually govern, to lead,
Yeah.
but at the same time, build a system that keeps that very same power from, running wild?
It's the fundamental balancing act of politics, isn't it? And the sources you shared with us are really fascinating on this. They give us a great roadmap. We're able to draw on some really detailed research here, specifically on global accountability doctrines. Much of this deep dive is informed by work related to, I believe it's called Episode 111, Accountability of Rulers, which was researched by Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir.
Right, and that research gives us such a solid framework. It looks at how different cultures, different systems have all tried to solve this one core problem. And what just leaps off the page, for me, is the central idea that frames the whole conversation. It's almost like a political law of physics.
It is. The sources state it very, very clearly as a foundational ratio. Authority without accountability is tyranny.
That's it. That's the whole game.
It really is. And it's not just a nice philosophical quote, it's a practical equation.
Right.
If you have authority, and you need that for any state to function, then you absolutely must have accountability. It's the friction, the necessary brake on the system.
And I think it's important for you as the listener to really sit with that for a second. Why tyranny? Why not just say corruption or bad government? Why does the lack of accountability automatically lead to that specific terrifying word?
That's a great question. Because power has a corrosive effect on institutions and individuals. When a ruler realizes that their decisions, no matter how arbitrary, how self-serving, can't be challenged or reversed through a legitimate process, well, then the system stops being about the rule of law. It becomes about the rule of one person's will.
It's about caprice.
Exactly. Governance by caprice. That's the essence of tyranny in this context. It's not always about overt brutality, though it can lead there. It's about the complete lack of predictability. You live in a state of uncertainty where the rules can change based on the ruler's whim, and that's a kind of terror in itself.
So accountability is what gives the system its legitimacy. It's the guarantee that the ruler is playing by the same rules as everyone else.
Or at least that there's a mechanism to force them back into line if they stray. It ensures that the office is more powerful than the office holder.
Right. The system can survive a bad leader if the system itself is strong enough to correct or remove them. People's faith remains in the structure.
Precisely. And that's what gives us our agenda for this deep dive. We're going to explore this whole concept through three really distinct lenses that your sources lay out for us.
First, we're going to dig into the sort of spiritual and historical roots. We'll look at early Islamic doctrine and the idea of publicly questioning a caliph.
Then we'll transition to the more familiar, formalized system we see today, global impeachment doctrines, the institutional check.
And finally, we'll look at a really interesting modern case study that blends two different approaches: Pakistan's dual system of both parliamentary and judicial accountability. So before we get into those specific mechanics, let's stay with that philosophical underpinning for a moment. The sources really stress that you can't appreciate the solutions until you fully grasp the danger.
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's easy to see corruption as a problem, a bribe, a dodgy contract, but that's a sickness within the system. Authority without accountability is a sickness of the system. It's the death of the system itself.
So what does that actually look like on the ground? What happens when authority is truly, completely unchecked?
I think the most dangerous part of it is the rise of what we call unchecked discretionary power.
Okay, unpack that. What's the difference between necessary discretion and the dangerous kind?
Well, every government official needs some discretion, right? A police officer has to decide whether to issue a warning or a ticket. A minister has to decide how to allocate a budget. That's normal. It's necessary.
It's the practical application of the law.
Right. But it's supposed to happen within a framework, a set of rules, of precedents. Unchecked discretion is when the ruler can make those choices completely outside of that framework. They can enforce a law for their enemies, but ignore it for their friends. They can seize property without due process. They can make decisions based on nothing but personal loyalty or animosity.
And that destroys predictability.
Yeah.
Which, as you said, is everything. A business won't invest if contracts are meaningless. A citizen can't feel secure if their rights can vanish overnight.
That's the erosion. It's not a sudden collapse. It's a slow, insidious decay of trust in all institutions. You end up with a society governed by fear and favor, not by law.
So accountability, then, is the system that forces that discretion back inside the lines. It makes the ruler justify their actions based on the law, not just their will.
It must be procedural, it must be transparent, and it must be enforceable. If any of those three are missing, it's a weak check at best.
You can't just hope for a good king.
You can't. That's the core lesson constitutional designers have learned over centuries. You know the old saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. You have to assume that anyone in power is capable of abusing it.
So you build the cage first.
You build the cage first. The system of restraints, the checks and balances, has to be stronger than any one individual's personality or charisma.
And that's a great insight for you, the listener. When you look at any country's political system, don't just look at the leader. Look at the architecture. Is it strong enough to withstand a bad one? That's the real test of resilience.
Okay, let's start with our first example, and it's a historical one that is just so radically different from what we're used to. It's the early Islamic doctrine of accountability, specifically the public questioning of caliphs.
This is a fantastic place to start because it's so direct. It's not a committee meeting. It's not a legal filing. It's a citizen in a public space challenging the most powerful person in the state, face to face. The sources emphasize the word public. Why was that so significant? What was it about the structure of the early caliphate that even allowed for that?
Well, the Khanate held both temporal and religious authority, which sounds like it would make him more powerful, but in a way, it actually created a unique vulnerability.
How so?
His authority was based on a covenant, a pledge of allegiance called bay'ah, and that pledge was conditional. He was not a divine king. He was a steward, a custodian, whose primary job was to uphold the Sharia, the religious law, and ensure justice.
So he wasn't above the law. He was its chief enforcer.
Exactly. And because the law was seen as divine, it was superior to him. He could be judged against it. The community saw him not as infallible, but as a fellow believer with a very, very big job.
So what gave an ordinary person the right, the standing, to get up in an assembly and say, hey, explain yourself? If I did that in Congress today, I'd be escorted out by security.
The legitimacy came from a core religious duty in Islam, something called al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahi anil munkar,
Which means
roughly enjoining what is right and forbidding what is wrong. This is seen as a collective duty for all Muslims. So if the ruler was seen to be doing something wrong, misusing funds, acting unjustly, it wasn't just a political disagreement, it was a violation of the community's moral and religious contract.
So by challenging him, you weren't committing treason. You were fulfilling your religious duty.
You were fulfilling a sacred duty to correct a wrong and keep the community on the right path. That gave the challenger a powerful shield of moral legitimacy. The challenge itself was framed as an act of faith.
And we have historical accounts of this actually happen.
Oh, yes. There are famous, perhaps apocryphal, but deeply influential stories, for example, involving the second caliph, Umar. A man stands up in the mosque during a sermon and questions how the caliph got a piece of cloth for his robe that seemed larger than what everyone else received as spoils of war.
A direct accusation of corruption, basically.
Yeah, a very direct one. And the caliph didn't have him arrested. He had to publicly explain himself, with his son stepping up to say he gave his own share of cloth to his father. The point is, he was expected to answer. A failure to provide a satisfactory answer could have seriously damaged his authority.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Just imagine the raw, high-stakes nature of that. It's pure, unmediated accountability. How did that function as a defense against the tyranny we've been talking about?
It created an incredibly fast and powerful feedback loop. It forced a kind of constant real-time transparency. If you, as the ruler, knew that any decision you made, especially about public money, the Bait al-Mal, could be instantly challenged in public by anyone.
You'd think twice. You'd make sure you had a good explanation ready.
You'd have to. It's a profound, personal, and immediate check on power. It prevents bad habits from becoming institutionalized because they're called out so quickly.
But let's look at the flip side. Let's contrast this with a modern system. That historical model sounds powerful, but also maybe a little unstable.
That's the trade-off, absolutely. It's incredibly potent, but it relies on the courage of individuals and the moral consensus of the crowd. It could be volatile. A modern system, like impeachment, is the opposite. It's slow, it's cumbersome, it's highly procedural.
It's designed for stability above all else.
Exactly. The historical model used moral authority to check political authority. Modern models use institutional authority, the separation of powers, to check political authority.
But the core lesson seems to be the same. Accountability has to start with the right to question power. Whether that right is enforced in a mosque or a courtroom, the principle is what matters. The moment a ruler can silence all questions, the slide into tyranny has begun. That's a perfect transition. We've seen the power of the moral mandate. Now let's jump forward in time to the main tool modern systems use: global impeachment doctrines. We're moving from a public square challenge to a formal constitutional charge sheet.
Right. And impeachment is a really unique beast. It's the legislature's ultimate weapon against the executive, or in some cases, senior judges. But the first thing to clarify is that impeachment itself isn't removal from office.
It's the accusation.
It's the formal levying of charges. It's the indictment. The trial and potential removal come after.
I've often heard it called a political process dressed up in legal language. Is that a fair description?
It's more than fair. It's essential to understanding it. If it were a purely legal process, you'd be in a courtroom with a jury, and the standard would be guilt beyond a reasonable doubt for a specific crime on the books.
But that's not what impeachment is about.
Not at all. The
Yeah.
standards are almost always political in nature. The U.S. Constitution uses high crimes and misdemeanors. Other systems might use gross misconduct or violation of the Constitution. These aren't things you can just look up in the criminal code.
They're subjective.
They are. They are fundamentally about whether an official has so profoundly broken the public trust that they are no longer fit to hold office, even if they haven't committed a specific indictable crime. It's a judgment made by politicians representing the people.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics, because this is where you really see the design philosophy at work. Globally, there's a pretty common two-stage structure.
Yes. And it's designed to be difficult, to have a lot of friction. Stage one is the accusation, the indictment. This is typically done by the lower house of the legislature, the House of Representatives, the National Assembly.
The body that's considered closest to the people.
Exactly. And to pass the articles of impeachment, they usually only need a simple majority. This first stage is about saying, there is enough evidence here, the alleged offense is serious enough, that we need to proceed to a full trial.
But then it gets much, much harder. Stage two is the trial and the vote on removal. And this is handled by the upper house, the Senate, or sometimes a high court. And this is where we see the constitutional firewall.
The supermajority.
The supermajority, often 2/3. Why is that number so critical? Why make it so incredibly difficult to actually remove someone?
Because the designers of these systems were terrified of one thing: partisan weaponization. They knew that if a simple majority was all it took to remove a president or prime minister, politics would become a constant cycle of revenge.
The moment one party lost the presidency but won the legislature, they'd just impeach the president.
Instantly. It would create complete and total instability. The supermajority requirement is a forced break. It says you cannot remove a democratically elected leader just because you don't like their policies.
You need a consensus.
A broad cross-party consensus. The transgression has to be so clear, so egregious, that a significant number of the leader's own party are willing to vote to remove them. It forces the issue to rise above normal politics.
What's fascinating here is that the system is built to make impeachment a rare event. It's supposed to be hard.
It's the constitutional emergency brake, the nuclear option. In a healthy political system, you should never have to use it. Its very existence is supposed to be the deterrent.
So connecting this back to our ratio, impeachment is the ultimate procedural backstop. It's the system saying, okay, the authority is tipping towards tyranny, and we have to activate this incredibly difficult, painful process to stop it.
And that's why an impeachment process is often seen as a sign of systemic failure. It means all the normal channels of oversight, negotiation, and political compromise have broken down.
But does the threat actually work? I mean, if it's so hard to succeed, can't a determined leader just brush it off knowing they'll likely be acquitted by their party in the Senate?
That's a really sharp critique, and it's a live debate in constitutional law. You're right, if it becomes a purely partisan exercise that always fails, it can lose its sting. But even a failed impeachment has consequences. The process itself forces information into the public domain. There are hearings, testimony under oath, documents are released. It creates a detailed public record of the alleged misconduct.
So even if the leader survives, they are politically wounded.
Severely. Every single legislator is forced to go on the record, to defend or condemn the actions. It drains political capital, dominates the news cycle for months, and can cripple a leader's ability to govern effectively. So even without removal, it still functions as a powerful, if painful, form of accountability. It's not just a pass-fail test.
So we've covered a historical moral check and the modern institutional check of impeachment. Now let's zoom in on the case study from the sources, which presents a kind of belt and suspenders approach. Pakistan's dual system of accountability.
Yes, this is a really compelling model because it doesn't just rely on one mechanism, it creates redundancy. The theory is that by having two distinct branches, the legislature and the judiciary both providing checks, you strengthen the entire system against abuse.
It's like having two independent security systems for the same building.
A perfect analogy. If one fails or is compromised, the other one can still catch the intruder.
So let's break it down. First, there's the parliamentary side. This feels more familiar, like the systems in the UK or Canada. It's about political responsibility.
Exactly. In a parliamentary system, the executive, the prime minister, and their cabinet are drawn from the legislature and are only in power as long as they command the confidence of that body. The ultimate tool here, the parliamentary equivalent of impeachment, is the no confidence motion.
And how does that work?
If the opposition or even members of the ruling coalition feel the prime minister has failed due to incompetence, corruption, or losing their mandate, they can bring a motion to the floor. If a simple majority of the National Assembly votes for it, the prime minister is out. The government falls.
So that's the big one, the nuclear option.
Yeah.
But there are smaller day-to-day accountability tools as well, right?
Oh, constantly. And this is where parliamentary systems can be very robust. You have things like question hour, which is often a very lively televised event where any legislator can stand up and directly grill a minister on policy.
And they have to answer.
They have to answer. Then you have powerful parliamentary committees that dig into the details of budgets, legislation, and government performance. They can call witnesses, demand documents. It's a continuous, granular form of oversight.
So the whole system is designed to keep the executive on their toes politically. They have to constantly justify their actions to their peers, the elected representatives.
Their authority is always conditional on performance and maintaining that confidence. Lose it and you lose your job. It's very direct.
Okay, so that's the political check. Now for the second, parallel system, judicial accountability. This is where the Pakistani model gets really distinct.
It is. This check is not about political performance. It's about legal compliance. It's about holding everyone, including the prime minister and members of parliament, accountable to the supreme law of the land, the Constitution.
And the main tool here is judicial review.
Judicial review is a big part of it. The Supreme Court can strike down laws passed by Parliament or actions taken by the executive if they are deemed unconstitutional, but in Pakistan, it goes further. The judiciary has a role in assessing the eligibility of officials to even hold office in the first place.
Right. The sources mention specific constitutional articles, like 62 and 63. What do they entail?
Well, this is where it gets very complex and, frankly, controversial. These articles lay out prerequisites for holding public office that go beyond age or citizenship. They include requirements for a person to be sagacious, righteous, non-profligate, and honest and ameen, which means trustworthy.
Those sound more like moral qualities than legal standards.
They are, and this gives the judiciary the power to disqualify a politician based on a legal interpretation of their moral character. For example, if a court finds that a politician was not honest in their financial asset declarations, they can be disqualified from holding office for life.
Wow. So even if a prime minister has a huge majority in parliament and is incredibly popular?
The Supreme Court can remove them from office if they are found to have violated one of these constitutional eligibility clauses.
That's an immense amount of power for the judiciary.
It is, and it completely bypasses the political calculations of a no-confidence vote. The court's decision is based on a legal or quasi-moral finding, not on political popularity. It says, we don't care if you have the votes. You are not legally fit to hold this authority.
So let's synthesize this. How does having both these systems, the political parliamentary check and the legal judicial check, create a more robust defense against tyranny?
It closes the gaps. Think about it. A powerful, charismatic leader might be able to control their political party completely, making them immune to a no-confidence vote. The parliamentary check is neutralized.
But they're still vulnerable on the legal front.
They're still vulnerable to a court case about their financial dealings or their past conduct. The judicial check remains active. Conversely, a leader might be perfectly clean legally, but be a terrible, incompetent governor.
And in that case, the judiciary might not have grounds to act.
But Parliament can still remove them through a no-confidence motion for poor performance. The dual system means a leader is being held to two different standards simultaneously: political performance and legal compliance. It creates this comprehensive web of accountability that makes it much harder for unchecked power to consolidate.
This has been just a fascinating journey through these different architectures of accountability. It really shows how universal this problem is, even if the solutions vary so widely.
It really does. Every society that wants to avoid tyranny has to build some version of these mechanisms.
So let's just recap the ground we've covered, the key takeaways.
We started with the core equation, the fundamental principle from the sources. Authority without accountability is tyranny. That set the stakes for everything else.
Right. Then we looked at the historical model from early Islamic doctrine, that emphasis on a direct, public, and morally grounded check, the ability of any citizen to question the caliph.
From there, we moved to the dominant modern framework, global impeachment doctrines. We saw them as this highly formalized institutional process deliberately made difficult with a supermajority requirement to prevent it from becoming a purely partisan tool.
And we wrapped up with the case study of Pakistan's dual system, that redundancy of having both a parliamentary check, which focuses on political confidence, and a judicial check, which focuses on legal and constitutional fitness.
And if you distill all of that, the single key takeaway for you, the learner, is that accountability is never an abstract ideal. It's an architecture. It has to be built with procedures, with defined limits, and with real enforceable consequences for crossing those limits.
This raises an important question, though. It's something of a recursive problem, a loop.
It is.
We've spent this whole deep dive talking about the systems that hold rulers to account. The legislature holds the executive to account. The judiciary holds both of them to account. But who checks the checkers?
That's the million-dollar question in constitutional design, isn't it?
What happens when the accountability system itself becomes the source of the problem? If a legislature becomes so hyperpartisan it refuses to act, or if a judiciary, as some might argue, oversteps its bounds and starts making political decisions instead of legal ones.
Using those very accountability clauses as a political weapon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here's the final thought for you to chew on. If authority without accountability is tyranny, and the accountability system itself wields the ultimate authority in a state, how do we hold that system accountable? How do we safeguard the protectors themselves?
And with that puzzle, we'll leave it there. Thank you for providing these incredible sources and for joining us on this deep dive into the scales of power.
We'd encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, the debates around judicial activism, the limits of political oversight, because they're at the very heart of what makes a society free and stable. Until next time.